Hello, this is George Whitten with Worthy News. It is March 8th, 2023. In this episode, we're going to talk about East Palestine, the Jesus Revolution and the Jesus Movement, the revival in Ashbury, Israel and Purim, and finally, the J6 protest. We visited East Palestine last week. It was actually the 1 year anniversary of the wreck. For those that don't know, it's a really small town in Ohio. It reminds me of a lot of small towns. It's like the small towns you would see in Pennsylvania, Indiana, Michigan, West Virginia, Kentucky. It's about 4,700 people. This train derailment caused such a huge issue that 4,700 people are now, their lives have been upheavaled. And every person I talked to was tired of talking to the media. However, they opened up to me as I told them I'm a pastor who runs a Christian news agency. They were open to talk to me about what had happened. In many cases, we had deep, intense conversations about God. And in many ways, just my wife and I being there to be a support, I believe, really encouraged several who were just tired of just the nonstop drama. The really sad thing is that it doesn't seem to be any foul play whatsoever. They actually had cameras and they could see that the bearings of the wheels were actually basically, if not on fire, they were showing, heat 20, 30 minutes before the accident even happened. So it was completely preventable. People are hoping for the best. However, people aren't optimistic. Um, Families are leaving the town. I heard from first hand accounts, at least five families that were leaving and another five families. Basically, those families who had rented houses are leaving, and those that had bought houses are stuck, and their property values have just completely plummeted. The stream where the accident happened was completely contaminated. I saw firsthand videos of those who lived in the town, and the EPA basically said 40,000 fish had died. One of the residents told me they routinely fed deer on his property, and for the past week or so, he hasn't seen a single deer. So we don't know the extent of the loss on the deer population. However, when I was talking to residents, some talked about dealing with sore throats, so they just been staying inside. And they told me they could smell the effects of the trail derailment at times. And those that I talked on the cleanup crew said they had just recently removed the train tracks. And so when they had removed the train tracks, that happened the day that we arrived. And then they were still siphoning all the water where the derailment had taken place. They informed me that they were digging up all of the dirt underneath of where it was taking place, and hopefully that'll solve some of the problems. Some of the residents told me they didn't believe the EPA's report about the air quality was good, and definitely didn't believe them about the water quality. And the residents told me they were definitely concerned if it actually gets to the town's aquifer. Um, One of the residents did tell me that he really appreciated the overwhelming love they've been receiving from people, just various people from around the United States. I asked one gentleman what he thought was the most unreported aspect of the trail dream, and he told me that the love that he felt from those around the country. He told me that several touching stories of random anonymous gifts and donations that were given to different townspeople as they were dealing with the aftermath of the accident. Many of the townspeople are transplants. They actually moved to the town for a quiet life, and they're struggling to see a future. Honestly, I believe the town will be a ghost town within 5 years because I really believe that everyone in the town's probably going to receive a huge payday. I don't see how they will not. Trump made an appearance. He was 2 hours late. He didn't stay very long, and this town is basically Trump country. I believe I read an article. 75% of people voted for Trump, but the residents I talked to really felt this was so political. He just showed up. He was 2 hours late. Didn't stay very long, and so he acted like a politician. And quite frankly, the residents there voted for Trump because he didn't act like a politician. And now he was acting like one. So that kind of I heard several different takes on that. And the residents have been complaining that the government is doing way too little and they have been way too late. the bottom line, the town needs prayer, and those that simply wanted to live a quiet life, now their lives have been completely turned inside out, upside down. Um, Another event that's taken place, obviously, is this whole situation that took place in Ashbury, this Ashbury revival. And the thing that I found interesting about it was, there was no organized structure. There was no hard chairs. There's no, it was an ugly interior. The lights don't dim. There's nobody serving donuts. There's no smoke machines, no fancy lights, no timers or time restraints. It wasn't a perfect production. There was no leader, no teams, no hierarchy or competition. Um, so the only thing that was really happening was that God was showing up. And when I first got filled in the Spirit, this was in 1998. I was really earnestly praying for revival, and the Lord really spoke to my spirit about the two different aspects. One, that the true revival is going to happen by the unknowns. And I really prayed, and I said, Lord, when explain what you're trying to explain to me, and the Lord really pressed upon me. Those that put Jesus so far in front of them, they actually don't see you; they just see Jesus in you. And if you go to Worthy News, I've been running Worthy News since 1999. You won't find my name on the website. We're visited by thousands upon thousands of people, and we've had millions of pages viewed. And people would hardly know that I run the entire news agency. But the reason why is because I really don't want people seeing me. I really just want people, seeing that the voice of the Spirit is speaking, and what is He trying to convey about what's happening in the world today. And with this revival, there is this element of wokeism, and we have to really be careful about this. And we have to understand that that God works through flawed people. And I really believe that the next revival, if we can really learn from past revivals and how God uses the great outcasts, that in this revival, I really believe those coming out of the LGBT movement, those coming out of Antifa, those coming out of Black Lives Matter, the cast-offs of the world are going to be the ones that I believe that God will use to pendulum shift the other way. I don't believe that we can go ahead and shy away and say and deny what is sin. But within movements, movements are messy. In the 1960s, you had, the Time Life is God Dead. And just a few years later, they had a huge Jesus revolution. And from that, we have this new movie out, the Jesus Revolution. And you have to understand that this revolution happened amongst people that the church had basically cast off. I'm not sure anyone could have predicted a revival happening in San Francisco, in California, and yet that's what happened. But this is all messy. One of the main stories, one of the main people in the story was a guy named Lonnie Frisbee. And if you actually read Lonnie Frisbee's story, it's quite tragic, quite honestly. But one thing that happened when I realized about this movement, I actually know in this article, this is a Wikipedia article. I actually know John Higgins that is mentioned in this article. So I called Pastor John. I've known him for years. I used to work at Calvary Chapel, Jerusalem, and I asked him what he thought about different things. He didn't see the movie, but he explained to me a lot of what was taking place. And one of the things that I found interesting was he told me about the multiple cults and the multiple different spiritual forces all at the same time. There was a time in a season that where in Huntington Beach and where the Chuck Smith revival happened, there was another cult, and they had this lighthouse coffee house, and in this coffee house, this guy David Berg, who was called Moses David, he had women go out flirting fishing and through prostitution winning people to his cult. I mean, this revival happened in the Jesus movement through flawed people with an environment around them that was completely messy. It's not, things are not going to happen easily. It does. Nothing is really clear cut, and we know today that the events that happened in the Jesus Revolution amongst a bunch of hippies, those ministries are still active today. And the one great thing that Chuck Smith did was he was an expository teacher. And what I mean by that was he led a movement of Calvary chapels where they read verse by verse. Pastors couldn't skip entire passages they weren't comfortable with. Now, I know a lot of Calvary Chapel pastors, and a lot of Calvary Chapel pastors on tough verses just read the verse and and keep moving along. Um, but what I find interesting was that Chuck brought it back to the Word of God. And this is the beginning of this movement. And if this is truly revival, it has to be based on the Word of God. But at the same time, the very beginning of any movement, if there's a mass influx of people coming into the kingdom, they're basically going to be unchurched or really not understanding. This is why it's so crucial for those of us that have been believers for years to really train them up on all the details of the faith, because we cannot compromise on the Word of God. But at the same time, we have to recognize that when they come in, when you go fishing, you don't get clean fish. Usually you have a lot of fish that you have to clean and gut, and there's a lot of things. So it's not easy. But at the same time, I really do believe that we're entering into a new season. Um, a lot of things happened this week within Israel. It was an interesting article that the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, he basically they said, you can't defend yourself because there's a law here. Well, Netanyahu says, well, which law? And the irony is that this is happening during Purim, and Purim is the celebration of when Haman and was defeated by Mordecai and Esther. And at the time, the king had signed a petition, and he couldn't revoke his law that he just made. So Mordecai said, "Listen, don't revoke the law, but just create another law saying the Jews can protect themselves." And so I found this interesting that this is happening at this unique time. Um, the other thing that is kind of happening is that the judicial overhaul that is causing massive upheaval in the country. I believe that we're going to see a compromise in the future. For those that saw my last week's episode, um, I, I I understand Netanyahu's position in basically overhauling the way judges are picked. I understand that position completely. The problem that I really had with his judicial overhaul was the idea that they were going to stipulate that the entire Supreme High Court, and there are 15 justices in the High Court, that they have to vote unanimously to overturn, to cancel a law. So basically, what this law would actually do is remove the checks and balances. That's my specific issue with the law. And we'll see how this all plays out. My wife and I are scheduled to go to Israel. We're leading a tour and I really believe that we're there for the 75th anniversary of Israel. That's the what's called Yom Ha'atzmaut. It is the Day of Independence. We'll actually be in Jerusalem on that day. Those 2 days, the day of mourning, which is the day before. It's what we would understand as Memorial Day in the United States, and then the Day of Independence, which follows that day. And I really believe we're there really to kind of lead a prayer walk and a prayer time for our group over the entire country. If you understand how God moves, I'll relay just a short story. Way back when, it was actually the day before we went to war inside of Gaza, and the first time that rockets were actually fired close enough to our little town of Arad. And I remember getting ready to give a message, and I was sitting down at my the sofa, and the whole house is filled with people worshiping. We probably had about 50 people in the house that night, give or take. And the Lord just spoke to me sitting quiet. Do not give this message. And I remember in my spirit saying to the Lord, well, you gave me this message to deliver to why would you have me not deliver this message? And the Lord said, not tonight, not tonight. And I asked the Lord, what do you want me to do? I mean, and the Lord basically said, you need to do a prayer walk. A prayer walk. Now, we have never done one. That's the only time that we ever did one. And I went ahead and I just told people, we're going to go ahead and break up into teams. And I want you to go ahead and walk all throughout the city, praying over the city. And we'll just go and we'll just meet back here in an hour or two. And so I had everyone walking and praying all over the city. The next day we went to war, and not a single rocket touched our town. So, there's times when you're called to go to certain areas and it seems crazy and hectic, but I really do believe that God has placed us in a unique season, a unique time in Israel, and I do believe that we'll probably go to war this year. Um, the other thing that has been kind of happening in the last couple weeks is the advent of how social media has come out, and we realize now that there was an inner working with the government with social media to prevent stories from coming about, and how conservative sites have been blacklisted. Way back when, this was an article, January 26, 2020. And I can actually see the day that Worthy News was blacklisted, that we were no longer able to be found in the top 10. When you typed in Christian news in Google, we had always been in the top 10 for years. I mean, we've been running the news agency since 1999. We have thousands upon thousands of articles on our sites with thousands upon thousands of websites connecting to us. But it was on this particular day, and as I went through the news of that day of why we were blacklisted, I came across this article, and this was actually an article written by Bill Gertz. And Bill Gertz had interviewed a former military Israeli intelligence officer, and he said this virus had the 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 makings of a biolab leak. It was originated in a lab more than likely, and the article actually was piggybacking off of a radio a broadcast that was done by Radio Free Asia. And so here was this article talking about how it could have been listed, and now we find out it probably was leaked. I remember talking to a Taiwanese pastor, and a Taiwanese pastor, and when talking to him, I said to him, "Well, how do you trust the news? How do you figure out what news to read?" And he said to me, "The news that they censor in China is what we look at the most." And here was the beginning of how we were blacklisted, and we continue on. And the next time we were blacklisted was when we were talking about the Hunter Biden laptop. This happened just a few, about a month before the election, and we were putting up different articles about this, and now we realize that it was not Russian disinformation, but rather it is actually a factual story. And I knew it was factual. Why? Because if a paper as large as the New York Post, and it's not just a small newspaper, the New York Post is one of the oldest newspapers, you know, in the world. And if they go ahead and publish an article that they could be sued on, then they're not going to publish anything. And they ran with the article. Now they're not being sued. Guess what? The article was true. So now, if we realize there's a direct connection, who was actually censoring the internet? There was a direct intervention by the government. And later this week, we had a big, kind of a big explosion all over social media as the surveillance tapes of the G6 surveillance tapes are kind of unleashed. The thing that was interesting was that Tucker Carlson showed the QAnon shaman, And this guy with the buffalo horns, and he's walking around, and he has a prayer. And what I found interesting was saying, "My Heavenly Father," and he's not a Christian. He actually kind of is in some New Age type thing, but he actually said in his prayer, "I'd like to thank the police officers that allowed us into the building." And you saw here they were going ahead and walking them around. They were literally escorting him in, because you had to wonder, how did he get into the Senate chambers? We were going ahead and covering this, and Facebook went ahead and removed our account for 90 days because of this photo. And the photo was the guy sitting in the Senate chamber. So I just found it, more than interesting. So the things that they're censoring are the things you have to really wonder about. We're living in a day and age where deception is everywhere. The very first thing that Jesus said about the last days was, "Take heed that no man deceive you," meaning that we're completely surrounded by liars. I mean, we're surrounded, and the only thing that we can do, and the only thing we can control, is our walk. I have a very simple thing about life. Look, just stay in His will. Don't worry about all these different things. And we're now living in the time of, the great harvest. And I call this the great harvest because, in the parable of the wheat and the tares, you had a situation where the tares are growing up with the wheat. And the disciples asked him, Should we uproot the tares?" And he said, "No, the enemy has done this. The enemy is contaminating our field. And at the end of the age, God is going to completely deal with that." The great revivalist George Whitfield said this: "If you try to stamp out the wildfire and remove what is false, you'll equally and simultaneously remove what is real." I really do believe that we're coming into a time that the harvest is being prepared for us, and we are laborers into that harvest. I pray that you take our worthy briefs, that you go ahead and you sign up for them, that you go ahead and as you get it, there'll be a word of encouragement. But more than that, we'll give you your prayer points for the day, the things that need to be prayed for in the world, the things that need to be prayed for in Israel, the things that need to be prayed for in the United States, and the things that are happening to believers around the world. So that you actually have your prayer points, so you can actually fulfill your calling in this day to be a watchman. We also have a brand new app. If you haven't gotten it, it really is a great app. If you go ahead and load it up, you'll load it up, and at the bottom, you'll see World, Israel, U.S., Christian. If you were, for example, you were to hit Israel News, you click Israel and click the tab, and you can actually see the latest headlines from the Jerusalem Post, from the Times of Israel, from Arut Sheva. And we have 50 news services that we are connecting, you know, that are, all these feeds are all completely connecting, and everything is, plugging along. And I just want you to know that we are not trying to make any money on any of this. We are just trying to be someone that is sharing the good news. Thank you for your time. I pray that you are blessed. There are a lot of things happening in the world, and right now, if there's ever a time to get close to God, now is the time. Just seek His face and seek His presence, and realize that He's got this. The game is already over, and we're simply in a test. How will you pass the test? Well, God bless you. Have a great and wonderful week. Until next time, this is George Whitten with Worthy News.